BTV 이동진의 파이하키 안녕하세요. 저는 이동진입니다. 네, 정말 엄청난 손님을 모셨습니다. 다들 깜짝 놀라시지 않을까 싶은데요. 파이하키에 오셨습니다. 바로 조지 밀러 감독님이십니다. 네, 매드맥스 분노의 도로를 비롯해서 감독님의 영화들을 너무나 사랑하는 팬들이 한국에 정말 많은데 파이하키에 와주셔서 감사합니다. 지금부터 한 40분간에 걸쳐서 감독님께 여쭤보도록 하겠습니다. 간단한 소감 말씀 부탁드립니다.
It's wonderful, particularly in this remarkable room.
Thank you.
There, where you've collected so many things. I think someone could spend hours and hours in this room looking at everything. And it's also the first time in Korea. And to this point, it's just been absolutely wonderful. I mean, I've known a bit about Korea, of course, mainly from the cinema and the television. But to be in the city, it's such a beautiful city. Reminds me a little bit of where I'm from, which is Sydney in Australia. And everything, of course I'm on a movie junket, but the food, the cinemas that we went to, it's just brilliant. And of course the people.
네, 그냥 하시는 말씀이 아니고 정말 진심에서 칭찬해 주시는 것 같아서 네, 굉장히 기분이 좋습니다. 사실 이번 영화에 대해서 이제 직접적으로 질문을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 퓨리오사를 통해서 저희를 찾아오셨는데요. 매드맥스 분노의 도로가 정말 전 세계의 한국 팬들을 비롯해서 수많은 사람들을 사로잡은 그런 작품이 되었는데 9년 만에 모두가 기다리는 속편으로 돌아오셨습니다. 퓨리오사라는 작품은 이번에 저희가 정확한 작품의 어떤 내용을 보지 않아서 아직은 판단할 수 없지만 대략 한 20여 년에 가까운 긴 세월 동안 펼쳐지는 이야기를 보이고요. 그리고 이전의 분노의 도로는 며칠 동안 펼쳐지는 이야기를 보였습니다. 그러니까 전작이 사건으로 중심이 되었다면 이번 작품은 사실상 인물의 포커스가 되는 그런 속편이 되지 않을까 상상하게 되는데요. 퓨리오사라는 인물을 매력적으로 느끼게 되는 감독님의 생각, 이 캐릭터가 뭐가 감독님을 사로잡았는지를 먼저 질문드립니다.
Oh, that's a lovely question, actually, because I've been spending a lot of time thinking about it while we were making the movie, as we were writing the movie. You're right. Fury Road was over a very short time. Is that Bluey, by the way?
아닙니다. 한국 애니메이션에 등장했던 주인공입니다.
It's a different dog. Okay. Sorry, he was staring at me.
Every dogs look similar.
Yeah. Because Fury Road was a film, a chase. It was on the run all the time. We had to learn about the characters and the world as we were doing that. So you didn't have a lot of time. In order to tell that story, we had to write the story of Furiosa before we shot the movie, 18 to 20 years that this film lasts, and also for the year before Max joined Fury Road. So, and that's the only way we could tell Fury Road, because everyone who was acting in the movie, designing the movie, everyone had to know the background. So it was like a Bible, I guess, of as they call it, or a document which basically told everyone how the world came about at this point. And also, so that turned out to be a screenplay. The Mad Max story turned out to be a novella, a short novel. And the thing about it, I guess, that you really have to, I mean, obviously it's definitely about the characters, as I think all stories should be, no matter what time span they're against, because somehow in all traditions of stories, one way or another, they're all about characters, whether they're about sort of deities or animals or the character is the important thing, because somehow they help us understand who we are, as we're trying to find our way through this world. So with Furiosa, who is someone who had to survive in a very extreme world, she, and it doesn't happen just because we decide that she's some sort of action hero. We had to understand what resources did she rely on to survive and endure and try to make her way back home, because she was taken as a child, about 10, from the green place of many mothers. already as a child, she had talents and abilities and skills and resourcefulness of mind. First of all, not to be overwhelmed by the world, but to try to manage her way through it, no matter how extreme the situations were. And only by that, she was forged into the character that we encounter in Fury Road. That was a very interesting part of the story. I mean, you look at all the lives, not only your own lives, but all those around you, your families, your friends, people you've known, others that you don't, historical figures. We're all forged in the crucible of life in some way. So in this case, it just tends to be a more basic, elemental, more brutal crucible than normal.
네, 사실은 분노의 도로에서 어떻게 생각하면 매드맥스보다도 더 많은 사랑을 받았던 캐릭터가 퓨리오사가 아닌가라는 생각이 들 정도인데요. 전작에서 사실은 샬리스 세론이 워낙 뛰어난 연기를 해서 사람들을 사로잡았습니다. 그래서 아냐 테일러 조이가 이번에 역할을 이 젊은 시절을 맡게 되었다 했을 때 기대가 되기도 하면서 살짝 걱정이 되기도 했는데 오늘 공개된 그런 그 푸티지 영상을 보고 나니까 그런 걱정이 사라졌습니다. 굉장히 강렬하면서도 그런 눈빛으로 아주 멋지게 이 영상 속에 들어가 있는 것을 우리가 확인할 수 있었는데요. 함께 하신 그런 감독님으로서 아냐 테일러 조이와 했던 경험이 어떠셨는지에 대한 질문 드리겠습니다.
First of all, I didn't know Anya's work. I'd seen her in trailers. And then Edgar Wright had worked with her on Last Night in Soho. And he showed me an early cut of the movie. And for the first time, I saw a full performance with Anya. And I asked him about it. And before I told him that it was for Furiosa, he said, she's great. If you have an opportunity to work with her, work with her. I said, you know, it's a tough role. And he said, what you see, she's very, very resolute. She's very disciplined. She's very hardworking. And she's got a ferocity about her that you see in her work. And that proved to be true. I found with these films, they're very physical. And all acting is physical in a way. They're like athletes, but they're emotional athletes as well. And she had that, and I learnt that. There were little clues. She grew up in a big family. She was the youngest, a lot of brothers and sisters, and she rode motorbikes when she was a child.
Oh.
She studied ballet from a very young age, and I found that ballet dancers, or all dancers, are very disciplined physically,
That's right.
so she could do stunts. But then, and she's very intellectually strong as well, and very skilled as an actor, like very precise. She finds the moment very, very quickly, as I think all good actors do. That doesn't mean she can't explore, but she gets, whatever she does is very, very, very clear and very precise. And I know that because when you're cutting, you're seeing take after take after take many, many times. So you know how good somebody is. And in the shooting of the film, that's what I discovered with her. It's really interesting. As you're writing, you imagine the character in a theoretical way. As you're shooting, it becomes more apparent because you've got small pieces of time as you accumulate the story. As you're editing, there's a certain point when the story, all the pieces flow together, where you no longer see the actor, you no longer see the theory, but you're experiencing the character. And as that happens on a movie, it's really interesting because you actually suspend disbelief and you really believe that that's a character. So now that we've finished the movie and we're starting to promote it, when I meet the actors like Tanya or Chris Hemsworth, like Anya, sorry, when I meet the actors like Anya and Chris Hemsworth, they're not real to me. It's the characters they play, and I feel that the actors who look different than I've been experiencing for 1 year, they're the real characters of me. So it's a strange feeling.
Okay.
You know?
감독님께서 말씀하셨으니까 자연스럽게 크리스 햄스워스에 관한 질문도 드리겠습니다. 사실은 전작의 이모탄이라는 이 빌런 캐릭터가 워낙 강력했는데 이모탄이라는 캐릭터는 상대적으로 이렇게 차가운 광기를 갖고 있는 그런 빌런이었다면 이번에 깜짝 놀라게도 크리스 햄스워스가 등장하는데 굉장히 뜨겁고 아주 능청맞은 그런 캐릭터, 그런 빌런처럼 보입니다. 이 두 캐릭터, 이 빌런들이 서로 이렇게 대조를 이루고 있다는 것도 흥미롭게 느껴지는데요. 크리스 햄스워스를 이렇게 빌런으로 쓰실 생각을 어떻게 하신 건지, 그리고 또 이 작품에서 함께 하고 나니까 이 배우에 대한 어떤 느낌이 다시 확신으로 드셨는지 질문 드립니다.
Oh, that's another very interesting question.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you're dealing, because in the story we see Dementus, the Chris Hemsworth character, who plays a warlord, a biker warlord who's sweeping across the land, basically marauding. And he comes to the Citadel. He encounters another warlord, the Immortan Joe. And in order to tell that story, they have to be different. They have to have different ways of gathering people, of ruling, of dominating people, different devices for their survival. For instance, the Immortan Joe lives in a citadel with so many places around the world from before the 20th century. Gravity was an advantage in all cultures. There's always citadels in every continent. You'll see them, the same behavior where the most powerful live at the highest because much harder to access them. The other form of survival for tyrannical figures is mobility. The fact that you have motorbikes, you don't need to. So those two cultures meet, two different ways of basically harnessing or manipulating other peoples to their cause, and that was an interesting dynamic. What happens is Furiosa gets caught up in both in both their worlds and emerges as the Imperator or Praetorian Furiosa at the end of the story. So that was a very interesting exercise to see how they would work. Those two characters would work. Chris, I knew his work, and like everyone else, I didn't realise what a very complete actor he was, and a very complete human being for someone quite young. Very, very mature and wise. And as I worked with him and got to understand who he was in the process of working with him, I was quite taken aback by how fully rounded he is as a human being. That was on the working side. Very disciplined, always on set. Doesn't go to the trailer. He had a 4.5-hour makeup, but beyond that, which was an interesting thing to talk about. But before that, once that was there, he was there on the set, partly to absorb what was happening around him, and partly to make sure that all the other actors working with him were working very well with the crew and everybody. Anyway, before that, I thought, I didn't realise how interesting an actor would be. Anyway, we met, and I asked him to read the screenplay, and his response was so insightful. He knew exactly what the character, well, not exactly, but he knew the depth of the character almost from the beginning. Somehow he recognised that character. As we were working, and it was a different thing that he's ever had to do before. One point he said, look, this is about 3 weeks before we started shooting. We were thinking, he said, look, I got up last night in the middle of the night because I was thinking so much about the character, and I decided to keep a journal and write. Without lifting the pen from the paper, I just kept writing and writing and writing about what I felt and what it was to be him. And there were 5 pages that he wrote, and only once did he cross out a word and change the sentence. It flowed out of him. And this was in the middle of the night, and I read it, and I thought, boy, that's such a deep dig, such a profound dig into the character. And he, with a lot of insight. And that's when I began to understand how thorough he was as an actor. Apart from the physical skill, obviously he's a physically very skilled person, but it's also emotionally and intellectually skilled as well. So it was very interesting what he brought to the role. The story is mainly about those two, and they have to match each other. They have to, as they say in the screenplay, the two antagonists and protagonists have to be worthy of each other to get a really good conflict and a good story, where you reveal the essence of the human being in a well balanced conflict. Yeah, so that was the experience of working with him.
네, 감사합니다. 지금 뭐 배우에 관한 이야기와 함께 또 이전에 그 양쪽의 구도에 관한 말씀해 주셔서 이 앞에 보게 될 영화의 어떤 힌트를 주시지 않았나 싶은 생각이 드는데요. 그 연관지어서 이런 질문도 드리겠습니다. 감독님 하면 사실은 매드맥스 시리즈는 가장 유명한 포스트 아포칼립스 영화이기도 하지만 동시에 또 세상에서 가장 뛰어난 저는 카 액션 무비라고도 생각합니다. 그런 측면에서 후대에도 정말 많은 영향을 주셨는데 선공개된 이번 푸티지 영상을 봐도 그 자동차 추격전을 이제 바이커들이 공격하는 과정에서 펼쳐지는 장면이 정말 대단하다는 생각을 했는데요. 우리가 이미 분노의 도로에서 보았음에도 불구하고 이번 영화에서 새롭게 본 그런 액션적인 요소들이 많아서 놀랐습니다. 특히 이제 그 패러세일링을 이렇게 원용을 해서 그리고 또 차 밑바닥을 끌어들여서 수평으로 차들이 질주할 때 이렇게 수직 방향으로 그 모든 것을 조감하면서 비추는, 그래서 이 두 가지가 굉장히 시각적으로도 아름답게 짜였다는 생각을 했는데 그게 아까 시타델 이야기하시는 이야기랑 또 연관되는 게 아닌가 싶은 생각도 있습니다. 드리고 싶은 질문은 이 액션, 기가 막힌 멋진 액션을 또다시 저희에게 보여주시게 되었는데 분노의 로드와 달리 이번 액션 장면들에서 감독님께서 가장 신경을 쓰신 부분은 어떤 부분입니까?
Well, when you make a story, the thing you can't do when you've made a film and you have a sequel or a prequel, you can't do the same with some variation. It has to be uniquely familiar. It can't be repetitive. So this of course had action sequences, which I really strive to make character driven. It's one thing to have an action sequence which is a lot of kinetics, a lot of dynamic things happening, but it's got to be as significant a behavior as, say, a dialogue or an intimate conversation. So that's the main thing that drives it. In terms of what we were doing in this film, again using gravity, in Fury Road, when we wrote the screenplay of Fury Road, I had a scene where some characters used the competitive advantage of being higher than what they were attacking, and there was some airborne vehicles in that. But as we didn't shoot that sequence because as I was sort of working on the film, I realized we don't need that scene. So when it came time to do it in Furiosa, I kind of took that idea and we put it into Furiosa, and it was very interesting because, as you say, it was underneath the vehicle.
Right.
The vehicle itself is a location, and you shoot underneath, inside the belly of it, under the engine, in the cabin, above, and indeed attack from above. So again, you're using all the dynamics that you possibly can to tell a story as well as you can. So yeah, again, I never thought of it, but it's exactly what happens. Yeah.
내년에 군대 가는데 한 1년? 살 자취방 없나?
1년이면은 요방이 딱이지. 근데 인터넷은 혼자 알아서 해야 되는 거 알지?
1년 뒤에 나가는데 인터넷은 기본 3년 약정 아니요?
선배, 내 친구는 비다이렉트 샵에서 1년짜리 가입했다던데?
야, 약정도 짧고 일시정지도 자유롭네.
대학생을 위한 비다이렉트만의 프리한 혜택. 더 자세한 혜택은 106 혹은 비다이렉트 샵으로.
네, 이렇게 황홀한 자동차 영화들을 만들어 오셨는데 갑자기 감독님은 어떤 자동차를 타시는지 궁금해집니다. 직접 운전을 하시는지. 차도 여러 대시라면 몇 대인지. Do you drive?
All right. I drive a car.
아,
It's an electric car.
아,
A very, very quiet. I'm not. In Australia, we call them rev heads. Rev heads. You know, rev head. I'm not a rev head. I only have one car. When I was young and a student, I rode a motorbike, but I stopped that very quickly when I saw too many accidents. I worked as a doctor in emergency, and 1 week in that, I realised how dangerous it is. So I stopped completely,
Oh.
and so I'm very cautious. But I love filming and putting together sequences which have action in them. I love kinetic cinema. It's moving image, so I love action. When I first tried to understand cinema, I read. I don't know if you know the book by Kevin Brownlow, "The Parade's Gone By." He wrote it in the '60s, and he was a British scholar and critic. And he wrote "The Parade's Gone By," and his essential notion was that all the language of cinema that we know today, which is a brand new language, only 125 years old, maybe that long, is a brand new language. Before cinema, there was the close-up and the long shot and the moving camera. That was nothing we could experience anywhere else. And he pointed out that every bit of the syntax of cinema was defined before sound in the silent cinema. Movies of Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd and Charlie Chaplin and all of those movies, basically the close-up, the wide shot, the high-angle shot, the vista, the intimate close-up, and even the moving camera. When sound came along, it slowed down because the sound was too cumbersome. And then by the time they got through the 40s, into the 40s and 50s, then the technology got quicker and quicker, and now they brought sound and vision. And today, you can put a camera anywhere. And it's the way each syntax of each film sentence is put together. It's kind of like visual music. So that was the thing that drew me to cinema in the first place. I was really fascinated by that. Subsequent to that, the thing that most draws me to cinema now is story. How to tell stories, but why we tell them. What is it about stories that we tend to see the world in an abstract or poetic way through our stories that we tell each other, whether it be movies or television or paintings or even a story, comedians and stand-up comedians, stories that we tell each other while we're waiting for the bus or something like that. This is all hardwired in human beings. My particular storytelling, and the one I'm most drawn to, is allegory, and usually allegory told through the movies. These are thoughts that I'm, having just finished a film, that I'm sort of trying to learn how to articulate. When the first Mad Max came out, way back in the late 70s, I didn't really know too much about cinema, but I did know I wanted to make an action movie because of reading things and thinking about what Kevin Brownlow said about the language of cinema. On the first Mad Max, when I didn't know much what I was doing, by luck, it succeeded in many territories around the world. And the French pointed out that it was a Western on wheels. And the moment they said that, I realized it had a lot in common with the Western. The Western basically in a reduced world, a more elemental world, and lends itself to allegory, just like most cultures have it. And it made a lot of sense. I mean, Mad Max has all the tropes that you might find in a Western, where the conflicts are much more basic, that the issues and perhaps what we learned from those interactions of humans are more evident. I think that's why I keep on coming back to these films, even though they're hard to make, just physically hard to make, but I can't stop thinking about them. So, anyway, that's my way of explaining, having just finished one of them, why I'm here. Yeah.
감사드리고요. 네. 사실 이제 모든 감독은 하나의 세계를 창조하는 그런 사람일 것입니다. 더군다나 이 매드맥스 같이 이전에 한 번도 존재한 적이 없었던 그런 세계를 상상해서 만든다는 건 정말 어떤 일일까? 저 같은 사람이 생각해 보게 되는데요. 감독님께 질문 드리고 싶은 것은 하나의 매번 영화를 만드실 때마다 하나의 세계를 만들어낼 때 가장 중시하는 것은 어떤 것인지, 특히 매드맥스 시리즈를 만들 때는 어떤 것에 더 중심을 두어서 그 세계를 상상하시는지 질문 드립니다.
Well, I think the most important thing, first of all, in one way, it's a retelling of a similar story in new clothes. As I said from earliest on, as I said, the French said, it's like Westerns on wheels, and so on and so on. So these archetypes are universal across time and space. And the person who best articulated that was Joseph Campbell. He spent 40 years in a library, basically collating all the stories told across all cultures, and came up with the book, A Hero with a Thousand Faces.
Several books of his.
You've got it here. Yeah, good. And as we know, it led to, of course, Star Wars and so many other films, understanding that. So the stories aren't necessarily different, because we're all, as Campbell himself said, we're all wired the same way. Our neurologies are the same. And in many ways, our anthropology is the same, the way that cultures work together. And I know this for sure because the one thing that is unique to Australia, which is a relatively new country, is that we have the oldest existing culture in the Indigenous Australian culture that we have on the planet. There are at least 60,000 years continuous culture. It's not written down, but it's still told today in their stories. And one of the great surprises of my life was to realize in their stories, they count for everything in the universe. Everything. Not only how each bit of the land is formed, not only where you find water, but also the stars and the universe and how trees are born, each animal, and so on. It's all in their stories. It's like the equivalent of a GPS you might have on your phone, or a Wikipedia to get all the information you need. So, and that culture has very similar stories, even 60,000 years ago, that you can find. Now, Campbell was the one who did the hard work and saw the commonality in that. So that's what I tried to that's why the stories look different, but the essential dynamics of them are the same, I believe. And they can't be, they're not a repetition. They are told in a way that they can be apprehended or received according to the times. So even though Furiosa is set in the future, we go back to the past in some and see a kind of a almost medieval world, or even more primitive world, but it's really it's inviting the audience to reflect on who we are today, each according to their own worldview. So it's allegory.
이번에 공개된 그 푸티지 영상에서도 이제 워보이들의 활약이 굉장히 인상적이었는데요. 워보이들이 이제 기억해줘라고 하면서 거의 자살 특공대처럼 행동하는 것들도 영화에서 우리가 볼 수 있었습니다. 감독님께 드리고 싶은 것은 이 워보이라는 굉장히 독특한 그런 사람들을 만들어낸 것을, 사실은 우리는 영화를 보면서 테러리스트들을 상상할 수도 있고 광신도들을 상상할 수도 있는데요. 어떻게 이런 집단들, 이런 사람들을 상상하시게 되셨습니까?
The one thing I know, that in all histories of war, it's usually a dominant figure manipulating or coercing usually young men. We don't send middle-aged men to war. It's usually young men. And in all of history, I think that's been the case, that they've been manipulated in some way. One of it throughout history has been, for instance, is to use religious belief to fight, so that young men believe that somehow, if they fight bravely, and as they say in Fury Road, die historic on the Fury Road, they will go to some warrior paradise. This is a common theme in all cultures, whether you go back very early on or even in recent times. Usually they require a religious figure as part of the process, and hence you have Immortan Joe, who presents himself as an immortal, and he will be the one who will usher you, particularly if you're a half-life, to the gates of Valhalla. So he's got, for war boys who know nothing else, that's the fervour that they have. They believe that machines are much more significant than human flesh, and that's why they do the V8. Human flesh is fragile, particularly theirs with their diseases and so on. They need blood, and they're going to live for a short time. That's his way of ruling. Dementus is a completely different story. He does it by his own charisma and a sharing of the plunder. So they're more like mercenaries. So these are all reflections or variations on a theme that we've seen over and over and over again through history, even until this very day. And this is one of the underlying kind of narratives or themes that we talk about, explore in Furiosa, as we did in Fury Road.
마지막 질문 드리도록 하겠습니다. 사실 이제 이번 그 퓨리오사의 이야기가 시간적인 설정으로는 문명이 사라지게 된 지 45년 정도 지난 그 시기랑 굉장히 관련 있는 것으로 보았습니다. 우연히도 매드맥스 1편을 처음 발표하신 게 1979년도니까 정확하게 지금 45년이 됐거든요. 그러니까 우리는 이제 문명을 잃은 대신에 매드맥스 시리즈를 얻었다고 볼 수 있을 텐데.
Yes, I never thought about it. Yeah.
45년간의 지난 세월을 보실 때 이 매드맥스라는 특별한 그 영화 시리즈가 감독님의 개인적인 삶에서 어떤 의미가 있는지, 또 감독으로서 본인의 삶에서는 또 어떤 의미가 있는지 이 두 가지를 같이 질문드립니다.
As I grew up as a child, like all children, I lived a lot in my mind. We lived in rural Australia, and most of our days with my brothers and I was play. And I think I'm still doing it now. It's still in my imagination. So it's a world that I go and visit and like to tell stories about. It means, obviously it means a lot. I'm still drawn to telling these stories, mainly because they're kind of all-encompassing, I think. They have many layers to them. So you, as I said before, you're reflecting on the world as it is today. You're trying to have a sense of who we are as human beings, not only as an individual, but collectively. I think when you have the good luck to be a storyteller, I think that's mainly what your job is. I think to try to somehow distill all the chaos and the information and all the noise that you have around you in the world, and distill them somehow into narratives that have meaning. So I think I fall into that tradition of storytelling again, which is as old as time, as old as there are human beings. Yeah.
네, 좋은 말씀 감사드리고요. 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감독님 너무 감사합니다. 네,
Well,
고맙습니다.
thank you. And thanks for asking such great questions. Yeah, they're really great.
네, 오늘 여러분께 추천드리는 영화는 많은 분들이 좋아하시는 매드맥스 분노의 도로 퓨리오사에 앞서서 한번 보시면 좋을 것 같고요. 그리고 감독님의 바로 직전 전작이었던 3000년의 기다림, 매드맥스랑은 또 완전히 다른 느낌을 주지만 조지 밀러 감독의 또 다른 세계를 잘 보여줄 수 있는 흥미로운 작품입니다. 두 편의 작품 BTV에서 보실 수 있습니다.
영상 재밌게 보셨나요? 여기 클릭하시면 제작에 큰 도움이 됩니다. 안녕!